Welcome to Hockeywiztalks podcast. Today I'll be giving fantasy hockey draft advice. Check out my fantasy sports blog at hockeywiztalksfantasy.blogspot.com. Before the draft, it's always a good thing to pre-rank your players. You should pre-rank your players in case you can't make the draft or something goes wrong with your computer. Drafting in fantasy hockey is quite easy if you're prepared for the draft. That's why you should do as many mock drafts as possible before your actual draft to practice your draft strategy. The most important thing to know about drafting in fantasy hockey is to know the scoring format your league uses. There are three main scoring formats: head-to-head, rotisserie, and points leagues. Your draft strategies will vary depending on your league's scoring format and the number of players you need to draft. If you are drafting in a 16 or 20 team league, your draft strategy will differ than if you're in a 10 or 12 team league. Here are a few general tips for drafting in fantasy hockey. First, you need to be aware of positional needs for your league. For example, if your league requires 4 centers, 4 left wingers, 4 right wingers, 2 wingers, 1 utility player, 6 defensemen, 2 goalies, and 4 bench players, you should draft the center with your first round pick. The reason why is because centers have more value in most leagues, especially leagues that count faceoff wins. For example, if you are in a 20-team league and you have the 16th pick in the draft, your best bet is to try to draft either Steven Stamkos, John Tavares, or Tyler Seguin. Any of those players would be a great player to build around. In the third round, there are 2 players you should target: Claude Giroux and Jack Eichel. Both these players are legit go-to players on their team and will get at least 80 points this season. You can't win without great goaltending, so I would not hesitate to draft a top-tier goalie even if it meant using a second or third round pick on them. The top tier goalies include Andrei Vasilevskiy, Sergei Bobrovsky, Ben Bishop, Tuukka Rask, and Pekka Rinne. If you get any one of these stud goalies, you are on the right track. If you can't get any of these goalies, you should go after Carey Price, Marc-Andre Fleury, Braden Holtby, Martin Jones, and Jordan Binnington. I suggest getting 2 number 1 goalies because in most leagues, you can't win with bad goaltending. When your league requires you to have 6 defensemen, you should have at least 2 dependable point-producing defensemen. Now, I wouldn't recommend using a second or third round pick on players like Brent Burns, Erik Karlsson, or Victor Hedman, but I would target a player like John Klingberg, Morgan Rielly, Chris Letang, or Dustin Byfuglien in the 4th round. Before drafting a winger, I recommend drafting 2 centers, 2 goalies, and a defenseman. This is a great way to start off your team. You can't miss on your first 5 picks, otherwise your team will suck. In the next 4 rounds, I suggest drafting goal-scoring wingers. Joe Pavelski should still be available in the 6th round. He should be a great pick at that position. In rounds 7 and 8, I would draft players such as Jeff Skinner, Mike Hoffman, Ricard Raquel, Braden Shen, or possibly Clayton Keller if he's still available. If at all possible, try to target goal-scoring wingers that have dual eligibility. After drafting your goal scorers, you must turn your attention to the defense. By the 9th round, your best option is either Aaron Ekblad or Zach Werenski, but Jacob Trouba is also an option as well. In the 10th round, you can draft another defenseman, or you can draft the best player available on the board. You definitely must draft another defenseman in the 11th round, because if you don't have 3 defensemen by the 11th round, your defense is not going to be very good. The first 12 rounds of your fantasy draft are important, but how well your team is really depends on the latter half of your draft. That is why it is important to know the value picks and sleepers. I'll further elaborate on breakout players and sleepers in my next podcast, but there is one hidden gem in fantasy hockey this year. That is Anders Lee, who is ranked 331st for some reason. Lee should be drafted anywhere from the range of 170 to 200, which is still a steal, considering he is a player who will get you 25 plus goals every year, and he is even more valuable if your league counts hits. Another player who should be back on the fantasy radar this year is Wayne Simmons, who is expected to play on the very talented first power play unit of the Devils. Simmons is a player who gets tons of power play goals, hits, and penalty minutes, which is great for fantasy hockey. The breakout player to watch this year is Kevin Labanc of the San Jose Sharks. With Joe Pavelski gone, Labanc will be playing on the Sharks' first line with Logan Couture and Timo Meier. He will also be on the Sharks' first power play unit. As a safety net, I always like to get 3 goalies, especially in a head-to-head league, because if you lose the goalie categories, it will be much harder to win the matchup. The best candidate for a third goalie would be David Rittich or Peter Mrazek, because they aren't ranked too high, but they will be starters on their respective clubs. If your league goes past 16 rounds, my advice is to draft players for a specific category. In leagues that count face-off wins, I strongly advise filling out your centers first because that is a category. In leagues that count hits and block shots, you should try to draft forwards that get tons of hits and defensemen that get a lot of blocks. My draft strategy is way different in my 20-team league than in a 10-team league. In deep leagues with big rosters, you have to draft a goalie before the 3rd round. Otherwise, you will have to settle for a second-tier goalie. If you are unable to get a top goalie, you will have to settle for a tandem, like Robin Lehner and Corey Crawford, or Corey Schneider and Mackenzie Blackwood. Of course, if you are to proceed with mediocre goaltending, you must have a terrific offense. In a 20-team league, you can actually do really well if you have a high-powered offense and mediocre goaltending. Your goaltending just can't suck. Drafting in fantasy hockey is really easy if you are well prepared. If you do a couple mock drafts and practice your draft strategies, you should do just fine. Check out my Facebook page at Mr. Hockeywiz777 and my Instagram, Mr. Hockeywiz77. On my next podcast, I talk about breakout players and sleepers in fantasy hockey.